Give me 1 second. I just wanted to come on. Okay. So what I'd like to do is, as I said, is deviate a little bit from the parsha and actually go on to do a little bit of looking at some of the aspects of Shavuot. To me, Shavuot is just this major chag that I think, not that we get it wrong, I think that's the wrong terminology. Don't realize how important things are that we are used to on Shavuot that we always deal with, and that we don't see a depth to kind of like the rituals that we involve ourselves in, because we say we know about them and then we just carry on with them. But as those of you who've stuck with me over the last couple of years know that my thing is kind of not to dispel myths, but to take what we have our knowledge and just put it just like one more step higher if we can, just so that we can find a little bit more depth. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take off the I think we might lose the image at certain points because I'm going to be reading it from the Aruch HaShulchan. So what I really want to look at is we have this thing of Shavuot. Shavuot, we know, everybody knows, is the Zman Matantara. It's the gift that we were given of the giving of the Torah. And what is so important about that is that if we've been given this gift of the Torah, then it must be that the day can't be a day like any other, number one. And number two, if we understand that the Torah has so many layers of depth, it must be even the things that we're so used to have those layers of depth with them as well. So let's start off with, if I would ask you what Shavuot is, what your image is of Shavuot, and please don't be embarrassed to say your own cheesecakes, I don't mind, but most people the image of Shavuot is like a milchik meal, number one, and perhaps Bikirim with the kids coming to the shul and bringing their little baskets of fruits or whatever it is, and then of course Tikkun Leil, the learning through the night. So I wanted to look at all of those things because if we look into halakha itself, so the halakha, let's start with the actual learning through the night, just to give a bit of context to that, and then we'll go on. So the halakha doesn't tell us that you have to learn through the night. In actual fact, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch and in other places, it never speaks about that. We should learn through the night. What the halacha says is that the tzaddikim rishonim, the early tzaddikim, were the ones that they always learned through the night. Why did they learn through the night? They learned through the night, as we know, as some type of tikkun, as some type of fix for Bnei Yisrael, who during the time of the Beit, when they got the Torah, they slept through the night of the giving of the night before the giving of the Torah, and it seems to be that wasn't such a good thing. Although it's difficult to understand that, because why wouldn't it be a good thing? Doesn't one want to be fresh when one is about to embark on this whole new journey of their life? I remember when before we had all our kids, everybody said, you must sleep before, make sure you get, because you'll not be able to sleep afterwards, but when you have a kid, and then you have a few more over the years, you don't sleep. I haven't slept properly for 18 years so far. 20 years. So it doesn't really make a difference. But on the night of the giving of the Torah, it's so bad for them to sleep. So it seems to be the problem was very simply because they should have been so excited. They should have been just completely overwhelmed with ecstasy that they were about to receive this thing that they'd been promised, that they shouldn't have been able to sleep. It's not about whether they could or they should or they shouldn't, but they shouldn't have been able to sleep. Now, one of the ideas that we have is that when we say the bracha for Torah, we say Baruch Atah Hashem Notein HaTorah. Notein HaTorah means Hashem is the giver of the Torah, which is why Chazal explained to us that there's no specific date given for Shavuot as Man Matan Torah. It's given to us as Chag Bikirim or Chag Atzeret, but not Man Matan Torah. No specific day given, because every single day is a day of the acceptance of the Torah. Every time we sit and we learn. Right now we're learning words of Torah, so that means that we are accepting a Torah which is actively being given in the present as we learn. There's a concept of siyata d'shmaya, that a person has this help from Hashem to not only to teach but also to learn the Torah, to be able to take it in. That's part of the notein haTorah. So the tzaddikim rishonim, these early great sages, would stay up the whole night in anticipation to hear the Aseret HaDibrot, and they would learn through the night, and they'd make a tikkun, they'd fix it up, and there's all different books on what the tikkun is for actual Shavuot. And it wasn't really for your average person. It was really only for the greats. However, and this is fascinating, around the time of the authoring of the Shulchan Aruch, around late 1500s, 1600s, right? The late 1400s, 1500s. Around that time, there is a fascinating study that is done in a doctoral thesis at Yeshiva University around the impact of coffee. How's this one? The impact of coffee on Jewish historical experience. And one of the things that they speak about is that when coffee was discovered and started being spread around the world through the wealthier European nations, one of them being Spain, that when coffee was discovered, that it then allowed your average person who couldn't just through his own excitement or whatever, desire to stay up, couldn't stay up so well, it allowed them as a stimulant to stay up, and so therefore became practice. It's a fascinating thesis, right or wrong, I'm not sure, but it became practice for Jews around the world. Then they were now enabled and empowered to stay up and to learn for longer, and so they did. Now remember, we're talking about the Northern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere, Tikkun El starts at 10 and finishes about 3. In places like further north, it can start at 11:30 and finish at 2. It's not hour-long Tikkun Leil. Hour-long Tikkun Leil starts from 6:30 and ends at 6:30 with nights. So it's a 12-hour stint. It's much easier to stay up for those few hours. So that's where coffee, and that started popularizing the concept of Tikkun Leil, staying up all night. Really, the concept of staying up late was reserved for the great tzaddikim. I'm not saying one shouldn't. I'm just saying one can put that into a certain level of perspective. So that's the one part. The other part that I want to look at, and this I think is really the biggest one, this idea of eating milchiks, right? We eat chalavi, it's geschmack. Everybody's got their own special recipes for all the different things. And, this is the time for Frangelicus to really shine, and all the other milchik places to really shine and to get their products out in an amazing way. But the question really is that we have to ask ourselves is, how authentic is that? And is it real? So yes, the Shulchan Aruch does say that there's a minhag, and listen carefully, a minhag, says the Shulchan Aruch, on the first night of Shavuot to have milchik. The Ramah explains that it means to have milchik before you eat your fleishiks. And what he says is that it's very simple. What one should do is you make kiddush, you should then wash, have some milchiks. Remember, milchiks, there's no requirement to wait a significant time between milchiks and fleishiks. You wash, you have some milchiks, then you put away all your milchiks, and you take out your normal yontif meal. You have to have new bread, a new set of challahs, because you can't use the challahs that were eaten together with milchiks. If you have your challahs separately and then you have your milchiks at another table, so then you can eat those challahs. But from a halachic point of view, you can't have the milchik challahs that you ate at the same table with your fleishiks. You eat your milchiks, you put away your challahs, you bring out the whole fleishiks, and off you go. What we used to do is that we would have a little table on the side and have like a kiddush, make hamotzi, and then move over to the table, eat a couple of nice milchik things, clean that up. Well, you have to wash out your mouth, you have to wash your hands, and then go and have a normal yontif meal. Because ultimately on yontif, one is supposed to have basar, you're supposed to have meat. Even on Shavuot, one should have meat. Why? Because that's what Shavuot is about. Because Shavuot is really Yontif is really about a connection back to the Shalosh Regalim, and the Shalosh Regalim, the part of the process of the eating was the eating of the korban chagiga, the celebratory korban. And in fact, the Shulchan Aruch says, and the Aruch HaShulchan brings it down much more clearly. He says that perhaps the reason why we eat meat and milk reflects the same reason behind the fact that on the Pesach tape, on the Pesach, on the Kara, the Pesach plate, we have two foods. We have the shank bone, the zrah, and we have the beitza. The zrah we've discussed before, we all know, represents the korban Pesach, and the egg represents the korban chagiga. That's special. So the korban Pesach is the Pesach-focused korban, and the korban chagiga is the general korban that is brought every chag. Because on every chag you have a specialized and you have a general. So too, he says, the fact that we have these two things, we have molchik and fleishik, is representative of the fact that we have a specific thing for Shavuot, and we have the general korban chagiga food as well. That's the two foods that we eat. So that is why we have. But if that's the case, so then why don't we just have an egg or something? Why do we focus on having milk? Because that's really the question. So we know there is this discussion around the fact that it could be that the reason we had milk is because at Mahar Sinai they were given the halachas of shchita, and before that they didn't have them, and because of that the kalim were necessarily kosher. There's so many variables within the story. The kalim were kosher, since they were kosher they had to have milk because milk was always kosher because it comes straight from an animal, and that's a wonderful thing. But let's look at a level higher than that. And in order to look at that level higher, I'm going to take a couple of things from from the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was the quintessential halachic work for literature Jewry, for Lithuanian Jewry, until the Mishnah Berurah somehow took its place. So if we just understand that the Mishnah Berurah, which is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch by the Chofetz Chaim, and the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch by the Chofetz Chaim lived in Poland. And the Chofetz Chaim wrote a very scholarly work, an incredible academic work on the Shulchan Aruch, referencing all different halacha, where as opposed to the Aruch HaShulchan was a rov of a kehillah in Lithuania, and what he did is that he wrote his book called the Aruch HaShulchan, which is the practical way in which the Jews of Lithuania would live. There's a massive discussion in the world today is that if you're a Lithuanian bred person, what do you follow? Do you follow the Aruch HaShulchan or do you follow the Mishnah Berurah when they differ? Now each person has got to follow their own thing. I find my personal feeling is that I find the Aruch HaShulchan easy to read. I enjoy the expense of it, but everybody has to do what their teachers have taught them in the past. So the Aruch HaShulchan expands a lot on this molchik thing. And one of the things that he says that is so important, he says, let's try and understand, what is Matantara all about? Well, Matantara is very simple in a way. Matantara is the taking of this nation of the Jewish people that came out of Mitzrayim. We all know this. We speak about this on Pesach a lot, and it's interesting. We don't really speak about these things on Shavuot because we're so focused on learning. But we forget about the fact that there is a big hashkofa in Shavuot. They come from this Pesach. They come from Mitzrayim. They come from this place on this 49th level of Tumah, and they are extracted out of there. Bezra Natuya with an outstretched arm, with a strong arm. It wasn't an easy process. They pulled out of there. They're told to leave. The Egyptians chasing them away because they don't want any other of their children to die. And they now start walking. And they walk for 7 days, having experienced these incredible miracles that happened in Mitzrayim. They walk for 7 days, and then they come to the sea. They don't know what they're supposed to do. Some are crying, some are davening. There's this whole story. And then the sea splits. They walk through the sea or around the sea, whichever midrash you want to look at. They walk through their tunnels. They get to the other side. The Mitzrayim, their enemies, are destroyed. And now what? What are they going to do now? So they walk for 3 days. They don't have any water, which the Chazal say means they didn't have any learning. They had no experience with depth of spirituality. They get to a place called Mara. There they learned that they taught some Torah. And then they carry on. And there's different experiences that they have along their way until 49 days later, they're standing in front of Har Sinai, of this mountain, and this mountain is burning with fire, and it's all miraculous, and it's incredible, and it's enormous. And for the first time in their lives, they're told to do something which is a bit of a shock for them. And what is that? They're told that for 3 days before Matantara, which we call the Shloshet Yamei Hagbala, the 3 days of almost preparation, which begin coming up soon, because it's going to be Rosh Chodesh tomorrow, and then it's 2 days, so it's Rosh Chodesh, tomorrow is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbos and Sunday, or even Friday, Shabbos and Sunday, are the preparation days for the giving of the Torah. And what are they told to do? They're told to wash their clothes. So their physical things have to go through a process of tahara, of purification, and they have to separate. The husbands and wives have to separate. Why is that? Because they've got to remove the focus from the physical, from that aspect of the relationship, and focus on the depth of spirituality, of kedusha, of tahara, of purity, and of sanctity. So it explains the Aruch HaShulchan, that transformation process is reflected in milk. Why? Because we know that milk actually comes from the body's taking blood and forming that totally into milk. And it's unbelievable. I mean, my kids have often asked me this, and it's such a difficult question to answer. Like, how can you have blood which transforms itself into milk, and now you can't mix the two together anymore? You got milchiks and you got fleishiks, right? From the same animal, from the same stuff. It's the same blood. It's just transformed. But says the Aruch HaShulchan, that's one of the reasons why we drink milk on Shavuot, because Shavuot is a transformative process from tumah to tara, from impurity to purity, from a lack of kedusha to kedusha, and it doesn't happen. It's not the 49 days that slowly transform. It's on that day there's a major transformation as it enters into the udder of the cow. The milk becomes milk. There's no mixture of blood in the milk. It's quite an amazing concept. So says Aruch HaShulchan, that's why we drink it, because it's a night of transformation from completely one thing to another thing. And he doesn't say this, but never the twain shall meet. You can't have milchiks and fleishiks together. So too, on the night of Shavuot, we should try and completely immerse ourselves in the kedusha, in the tahara of the moment of Shavuot. So that's one understanding of it. The other thing that he says to us is that we need to realize that the Torah itself is called chalav. Firstly, it's sweet, but more than that, it's the thing that nurtures us. It gives us so much in our spiritual lives, and in fact also in our physical lives. Like the milk of the cow nurtures the calf, so too the milk of the Torah nurtures us and gives us that which we need. It's an amazing thing, we know that milk, that cow's milk, is not the healthiest thing in the world to eat. In fact, there's a movement against cow's milk. People say goat's milk is much healthier. But the concept of the fact that a little calf can be born and can then drink from its mother and immediately start getting stronger and stronger, that's the concept of the milk. The idea is also reflected in the Gemara that speaks about that we should show the white of our teeth. The white of our teeth, which nurtures like milk, because the white of our teeth means a smile. When you smile, you show the white of your teeth. When you frown, you don't generally do so. But when we smile, we show people the white of the teeth. That also is something that's very nurturing. So we can see that perhaps our eating of milk needs to up itself a level. It needs to take us to an understanding that there is this connection, number one, to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Korban Chagiga, to what it meant to be a pilgrim moving up from wherever we were in the land of Israel, moving up to Yerushalayim, to really be able to connect to that. That's number one. And number two, that we can understand that the concept of the milk is really about transformation, transforming ourselves, transforming our families and our communities through the learning of Torah, through the engagement with Kedusha. So we've spoken about staying up all night. We've spoken about milk. I just want to for one more minute, and then we'll end, just to mention this concept of Bikirim. So Bikirim were brought on Shavuot in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. But Bikirim, as we have this with the children bringing the little baskets, is not not mentioned specifically in a major halachic work. It may have become a minhag, but it's really a new minhag. It's a minhag from a more agricultural-based modern Israeli society. And it's a wonderful thing, but more importantly than that, the Bikirim, because often what happens is that, the children make the sweet little Bikirim and then they bring the fruit, and the fruit's left there for the 2 days of Shavuot. So by the time it's time to give it away to people that need it, it's actually a little bit fraught. So I think what's far more important is to instill within our children the concept of what Bikirim is supposed to be. The Rambam tells us that we have a mitzvah of Simchat HaChag. We have a mitzvah of enjoying the Chag. How do we enjoy it? Samachta b'chagecha. How do we have that? Through basar v'yain, through meat and wine. And says the Rambam, when we sit around our tables, that's where we express our Simchat HaChag. But, says the Rambam, if we're sitting around our table and enjoying the Simcha of the Chag, because we've got everything that we need around our table, and we know that there are people who don't have the meat and the milk and everything that they may need, because we haven't been able to, or we haven't gone to the effort of giving them, so then the Simcha is not Simchat HaChag. The Simcha is what he calls Simcha Krisav. It's the Simcha of our stomachs. It's the Simcha of our insides. Because really, it's not we're enjoying the Chag, we're enjoying the food. And so therefore, I think that perhaps, and especially during these times where it's difficult to be bringing things that other people have touched and breathed on, what have you, perhaps these times we can have Corona Bikirim. And the Corona Bikirim is us making sure that there are people in the communities that we're attached to who may not have, to make sure that those people do have. And so therefore we've got learning the whole night, not for everybody, but for those who are able to. It's a wonderful thing to do. We've got the meat and the milk. We understand where the milk comes from, but let's try and have meat as well, because it's not a milky chag. It's a fleshly chag. Mamish, a fleshly chag, with all the power and all the passion that fleshly brings. And in addition to that, and perhaps one of the most important parts of it, is to ensure that others are able to also enjoy the Simchat HaChag in the same way that we are. So let's hope that has given some perspective. And please God, we should go into our Chag HaShavuot, the Chag of weeks, the Chag of counting, the Chag of Atzeret, of stopping to think of only ourselves sometimes, thinking of others, thinking of new things, and really is to make this a time where you can create a vision of the future for yourselves, for your families, and for the community. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful Yom Tov. If we don't see you, when I do see you, also a wonderful Yom Tov. Please God, we'll see you over Yom Tov. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And again, I apologize for being late. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
It's nice. God bless you.